I realized that many times when I was speaking to others, I was speaking to myself. And I realized also that what I was judging in others was buried inside me. So I figured instead of waiting for people to bring it out of me and cause reactions and then have to go through and be humbled by it, I decided to go to the big, giant Oxford English Dictionary and to underline every possible human behavioral trait that I might react to. And I found 4,628 individual traits in this dictionary. And then I wrote out to the side, I underlined the trait in the dictionary, page by page, neurotic as I was. And then I asked, who is it that I know that displays that trait to the most extreme? And then I asked, where and when do I display and demonstrate that trait, the same trait, to the same degree as I see in this person? And sometimes I'd have to go and look at 10 examples and sometimes 20, 25 examples in myself until they were equal. But I was able to identify the most extreme people that I labeled as being that way. I found I had them all.
Greetings and welcome to the Dr. Espen podcast. I'm your host, Espen. Today I'm joined by one of my personal heroes, a gentleman that I would say one of the creators of my own personal journey into personal development and human evolution, into learning about the mind, the body, the spirit. And one of the reasons why I do what I do today, this is of course Dr. John Demartini. He's back for a sequel. We had him on some time ago, but I've asked John to come on again to go deeper this time. I want to talk about some of the real keys to what it means to live an extraordinary life. And of course, that doesn't necessarily just mean being happy all the time, but it means really finding the passion and the purpose behind what we do. Many would have heard of Dr. John's work, but if you haven't, Dr. John is a polymath. He's a world-renowned human expert. He's got over 4 decades of experience and research now across multiple disciplines. I think for me, Dr. John Demartini exemplifies what it means to go from an experience where you are told that you would not be smart, you can't learn, or you're not able to achieve or amount to much, to become a world leading expert. And I don't say that lightly, a world leading expert in why people do what they do. He's got an extensive library of wisdom. He's traveled all over the world. He's done some incredible work. And today he's joined by us here on the show. And I want to really go deep as to answer some of the questions that we might have in this time being alive as a human species, and what we can do to step into that next level of mastery. Dr. John is a published international author. He's the creator of the Demartini Method. And I recently watched his new movie, which is called The Breakthrough, which I would highly, highly recommend that you have a look at. And also, if you've not been to his actual breakthrough experience, the seminar called The Breakthrough Experience, this is also something that I'd like to quickly discuss. I'm a 3-time graduate of The Breakthrough, and it has been absolutely life-changing for me, for many of my patients and many of my students as well. So let's dive deep into the revolutionary tool of the Demartini Method and what we can do to live extraordinary lives. Special welcome to the show once again, Dr. John. How are you today, mate?
I'm doing great. Thank you. It's great to be with you. Thank you for having me back on.
It's always a pleasure. Now, last time we discussed, we jumped on, we had the talk, and we talked about some of the concepts that I believe is important to get ahead in life. And a lot of that has to do with human psychology. And you've spent a lot of years, several decades, traveling the world, paying whatever price and traveling whatever distance to get ahead in life. When someone's watching, let's say that they might have heard of you before, maybe they want to dive deeper into the question, where does happiness come from and what does it mean to be happy? Is there even such a thing? And is it a fad that we should only feel good things and things are wrong if we don't feel positive all the time? I would love your take on this because a lot of people at the moment are going through great change. And so my first question to you is, what is happiness, really?
If I was to give you a magnet and tell you that I'm going to give you $1 billion cash on a pallet in US dollars or Australian dollars if you want it, if you can give me a positive pull of the magnet without the negative pull. So you cut the magnet an infinite number of times, but you'll always have positive and negatives. The pursuit of a one-sided magnet is sort of futile. The pursuit of a one-sided life is also futile. To expect a pleasure without a pain, a positive without a negative, a happy without a sad has already been proven in psychology to be a waste of time. There's a thing called hedonic adaptation, hedonic treadmill, hedonic paradox, that the more you pursue pleasure, the more it eludes you. And drug addiction is the pursuit of that. And it has its side effects, which is the pains that come with it. So if you perceive happiness as a pleasure without a pain, a happy without a sad, a positive without a negative, and it's one-sided, in my opinion, and it's only going to teach you that doesn't occur. If you are going to embrace the pleasures and pains, the positives and negatives, and all pairs of opposites, the unity of opposites, and find, as Aristotle called, the golden mean between the two, then you can have fulfillment. I am not interested in happiness. I am interested in fulfillment. And fulfillment means you're feeling full of mind instead of trying to search for a one-sided magnet. So I gave up happiness. It made me too sad, as a joke. It's a little book that I wrote. And
Wow.
I don't waste my time on the pursuit of hedonistic ideas of happiness. If you define happiness as that which is meaningful, and that's just a semantics, then great. I have no problem with that. My own life and the people I've interacted with have pleasures and pains, support and challenge, kinds and cruels, and positives and negatives, all pairs of opposites. When you can finally embrace both of them simultaneously and find the mean between those two, I think you have the most fulfillment. Wilhelm Wundt in 1897 talked about the unity of contrast, and he called simultaneous contrast was a stabling state for the human psyche. But people try to separate the inseparables, divide the indivisibles, label the unlabellables, name the inevitables, and polarize the unpolarizables, and try to get a one-sided outcome only to find futility and frustration and distress in the pursuit. And the distress and futility is a feedback to let them know that they're pursuing something that's unobtainable instead of pursuing something that is meaningful, an objective that's obtainable and fulfilling. So if I like to think of it as a scale of happiness from one-sided poles, which are fantasies, all the way to the center, which is meaningful, the mean between them. And so if you define happiness way over here, it's basically futile. If you find the happiness here, which is meaningful and fulfillment, it's utile. I'd rather be in utile than futile. Having maximum utility is way more meaningful than maximum futility.
So it's as if we find the balancing center point, the mean in ing, which is the middle of the two. Now, if this is the case, then how does one maneuver these challenges? You mentioned if you have a greater why, if you have a purpose, if you have meaning in your life, you should be able to embrace the support and the challenge. I get that. When someone's stuck in a difficult time in their life and they want to get ahead, they want to, obviously feel better because we don't want to feel the challenge. How does one go through this evolution, this healing, this next step into what they're hoping to achieve? Or is it more that we just sit in what is? And specifically, I asked this question in regards to the Demartini Method, because for myself, when I was young, I was in my middle 20s, and I came about your work, I was absolutely mind-boggled because I did not know how much of the conditioning that I was holding on to. And it wasn't until I did your very first breakthrough experience where I had a transcendental experience in the room. And I had never had this before. And I remember time and space disappeared and my heart opened so much that I could finally forgive what I thought was my mother doing horrible things to me, from abuse and yelling and screaming and alcoholism. And, the list goes on and on. And by doing that very curriculum that you've been teaching around the world for, I believe, 40 years.
52.
52 years, right? I was finally able to really see that everything my mother had done had given me as many benefits as drawbacks. And it gave me such a beautiful level of peace and acceptance. And so if we discuss this concept that happiness is to be able to dance in between the opposites and know that the entire spectrum is needed, how does one utilize, and perhaps also how do you utilize the Demartini Method in getting to that point of maybe acceptance, love, or wholeness?
Well, I don't go towards acceptance. I go towards appreciation, because acceptance assumes there's something that needs to be accepted. That is something that's appreciated, and seeing the hidden order in things. Stephen Wolfram talked about disorder being missing information. And he said that most people have computational boundaries. They have a lack of information, and therefore they react and judge instead of love and understand and appreciate. And so what we do when we infatuate with somebody, we're blind to the downsides. When we're resentful to somebody, we're blind to the upsides. We have missing information. When we love somebody, we embrace both sides. Well, when we have missing information, we have disorder. But when that information is reclaimed and discovered by asking the quality questions and allowing ourselves to become now cognizant of what we overlooked and seeing the whole, we have the order. So I'm interested in helping people find the hidden order in their apparent chaos and transform their entropy, which is a disordered state which causes aging, into a kind of a balanced state where they're able to be poised and present. And in that state, it's kind of like a timeless mind, ageless body state, a transcendental state. So the Demartini Method is a series of questions that you ask yourself or your client, if you're working with a client, to make them aware of what they're overlooking in their awareness. You know, when your mom, well, I had a woman in the breakthrough experience this weekend, probably 30, had a father that I know. He's up in age, and he's been aggressive at times to his daughter. She's sort of stubborn and really kind of redundant with her questions, and you get to a point where you just want to choke somebody. You get irritated sometimes. And the father would get aggressive. Well, she was holding on to a fantasy that daddies are supposed to be always kind, and not kind and cruel, and nice and mean, positive and negative, and all pairs of opposites. So because of that, anytime he didn't show the fantasy, it was a nightmare. If you embrace that human beings have a set of values, and when you do things that support their values, they're kind. When you do things that challenge values, they can be mean. Then you have a realistic expectation on people. But she had a fantasy about how dad's supposed to be. Where she got it, I didn't get to uncover how it came about, but whatever. So she perceived a normal dad to be cruel when he's actually playing out the other side that's needed sometimes by a father. So I asked her, how did it benefit you in the moments that he was aggressive and challenging to you? At first, there was zero benefits, but I held her accountable and I said, look again. And she finally said, well, I became very resilient. I took up martial arts and became proficient in martial arts to defend myself. And now nobody can mess with me. I became an entrepreneur because I didn't want to have to depend on anybody. I'm pretty well financially on my way to being financially well off. She's still young, but she's saving and investing. And she started to see these things that came about. And I asked her then, if your father had been the way you fantasized and been only kind and gentle and soft-spoken and everything else, what would have been the drawback? And she had some tears come out and she kind of broke her fantasy. I would be dependent. I would be passive. I wouldn't have been assertive. It's very obvious. I said, so you prefer that life? She goes, now that you're making me aware of it, no. What I got is pretty great. And she finally, I asked her, what are some more drawback if your dad had been the way you fantasized? And what's the benefit of your dad being the way he was? And we just kept kind of playing with this until she just rolled down in tears. And she realized that she loved her dad and she never saw that. And she saw the hidden order in the apparent chaos. And then she felt a heart and contacted her dad and said she loved him, which is something she had not done since she's a child. So that's the kind of thing. That's asking quality questions to make you aware of what you've been unconscious of so you can be fully conscious of both sides simultaneously, liberates you from emotional bondage and baggage, and allows you to be whole. And we want to be loved for who we are, and we have both sides. If we're trying to get rid of half of ourselves, we're not going to love ourselves. If we're trying to go and if we strive for that which is unobtainable and kind of try to avoid that which is unavoidable, we're going to live in the suffering because it's not going to happen. And that's why I'm not a promoter of one-sided fantasies, although it sells. It sells as an opium. It sells as a drug. It sells the fantasy. People buy the fantasy out of ignorance because of the amygdala. But the executive center, the real authentic you center in the brain knows better. And so, yeah, the Demartini Method is a science, a cognitive science on helping people discover the hidden order in their chaos so they can see life on the way, not in the way. And the only reason it seems to be in the way is because they're holding on to a fantasy about how life's supposed to be, and life's not that way. And so it seems like it's an obstacle.
This is exactly the experience that I had. And this is why I wanted to ask that question. Because recently, our last conversation, I was blessed, I should say, to join you on the ship when you were traveling the world. I came on the ship, we had a wonderful meal together, and I noticed that you were, every time we went through a conversation, you were poised and you were joyful. You were, I must say, incredibly humble for the experience of life that you've had, and bringing me in as a person, as showing me around, and it was just the most magnificent experience. And so I realized what I felt, and correct me if I'm wrong, but having done your breakthrough experience 3 times, having had this experience, I now find myself experiencing challenges, immediately grabbing a pen and writing the benefits. When I find myself elated, oh, this is so good and everything's perfect and life's going to be amazing, I do the opposite. I don't necessarily write down the drawbacks, but I bring myself towards a neutral state of gratitude. And I noticed as we're sitting there, we're having this meal and you're eating this little bowl and you've got your chicken, you've got your rice, and you're keeping things what seems to be at that neutral perspective. Have you designed your life to be this as well? Because you're doing the Demartini Method for people and you're collapsing things like that. You're bringing them back to this neutral point of love. I think this is what I experienced. Have you done this across all the areas of life and across how you live in general? And if so, how could a person do that? Such as, okay, I'm elated, let's come back to balance. Okay, well, I'm depressed or sad, well, let's see the benefits. What are your thoughts on not just understanding the model, but in terms also living in alignment with the methodology itself?
Well, I don't want to give you or anybody else the impression that I'm sitting there in Zen states all the time. That would be a false.
Oh, course.
That would not be accurate. But many years ago, and this would be 41 years ago, I would guess, I was just getting married to my first wife. And I noticed that if I had a big day in my practice and I saw lots of patients, and I made a lot of income and I had a lot of people thanking me, and I would sometimes allow myself to get puffed up, a bit arrogant and proud, thinking I was something unique or special, or, touch me and you will heal kind of illusion. And then I would come home in that mode, thinking about how great I am and not thinking about my family, not thinking about my wife, not thinking about my patients, I was just self-absorbed and puffed up. And my wife was critiquing. She was doing what she could to bring me back down into balance, back into authenticity. And
which is the purpose of the partner, right? To neutralize? Yeah,
she was doing that. And I thought, well, she's toxic. I'm the king. Who is she to bring me into balance, right? And I read a book on toxic relationships. I would not recommend that book. It's absolutely distorted teachings about human behavior. But it was basically talking about when you're up, they bring you down, and when you're down, they lift you up, which is what they're designed to do, by the way. And so I thought, wow, what a real, tough lady. I wanted everybody to praise me and support me and be kind to me and everything else. And I was addicted to that positive side. I also noticed that when we would have a fight that night, and we'd have a thing, we wouldn't sleep very well. It was a rough night. I'd come in the next day to work. I would have a day. And then sometimes the opposite would occur. I'd have, what a day. Whoa. And I'd have just crazy day. And then driving home, I'm kind of on a low. I'm beating myself up. And this is called the moral licensing effect, if anybody wants to look it up. And then I would come home, and then she'd be supporting me. She'd massage my shoulders. She could cook the thing that I was hoping for. And I was thinking, what kind of crazy thing is this? When I'm down, she's lifting me up. When I'm up, she's pulling me down. So I noticed that my practice was quite volatile during this time. It was going up and down because I didn't have governance over myself. And so anytime you don't have governance from within, you have to have events that govern you from without. And nature takes care of that. Your sociological relationships, every symptom in your life, in every area of your life, is actually a feedback mechanism to get you back to authenticity and back into sustainable, fair exchange and equanimity. So I decided to do a little exercise. And I still have this on my computer. I could pull it up. Still have it on my computer. I started asking myself, when I felt myself elated and up and puffed up and thinking I'm better, greater, and all about me, I asked, what patient's name did I forget? What birthday did I overlook? What anniversary did I not acknowledge? What staff member did I not thank? What procedure did I overlook? What paperwork did I not complete? And I asked 30 questions, and I did not go home from the office until those 30 questions were answered. And I had a tear of gratitude for the opportunity to be of service that day. And I did it really watching the sunset in my office, because I'm up about 700 feet up in the sky in this tall building. And I just watched the sunset. It's right out my window. And I humbled myself. And then when I drive home, my wife was absolutely present with me. It was like a quantum entangled particle and antiparticle from a distance. If I came into the center, she came in the center. I also noticed if I had a day that was kind of down, I asked, well, who did I thank? I asked the reverse questions. And I centered myself until I had a tear of gratitude, a gamma synchronicity in the brain, an alpha theta integration. And so the ventral medial prefrontal cortex fires off with spontaneous potentials in the brain and creates a gamma synchronicity when you're authentic. So I trained myself to go back to that authentic state before I went home. And I noticed two things. I had stable family. My wife was stable now. And my practice trajectory was almost straight towards our objectives. And so I realized that if I govern myself, the world around me doesn't have to govern me, and the volatilities calm down, and I'm more stable and more fulfilled. And I'm not here to be elated, but our addiction to pride and our addiction to fantasies polarize us into instabilities. And so that exercise has been gold. So when I developed the Demartini Method, I kept that in mind. If I'm infatuated with something, I want to see the downside until I see both sides. If I'm pride, I want to see both sides and bring it back down, because my pride is not who I am. That's an arrogant, exaggerated self that automatically creates the moral license, in fact, to humble me. And if I am now resentful to somebody, I'm not seeing their upsides. I'm not seeing who they really are. These are labels of incomplete awareness that I project. And when I'm down in shame, I'm not being who I am. I'm either exaggerating myself with pride or beating myself with shame. Neither of these are me. And we want to be loved for who we are. So I figured, why let the world have to give you feedback to get you back to your center? Pride before the fall, humility before the rise. Why not just do it yourself? So I developed a method with questions to help neutralize these vicissitudes that we experience in our misperceptions of life. And the truth is, there's a magnificent order actually in our life once we know how to do that. And then we realize that's fulfillment. That's why pursuing the immediate gratification of the amygdala of pleasure without pain will be futile. That's like taking cocaine and eating sugar without side effects. Not going to happen.
Exactly. And that was my point when I said, I noticed that you ate a very simple meal, and I kind of got the impression that you are able to live in the more equilibrated state by not going for elation or going for depression, but finding that middle ground. If a person goes through a challenging time in life or is elated, if they may not be familiar with the Demartini Method, the first thing that they need to do is to go to your seminar, go to drdemartini.com, go to the Breakthrough Experience, find out where Dr. John is around the world and go and attend those experiences. Do you also do them virtually at the moment?
I do some online. I'm doing one in Denver this week. I was in Houston last week. I was, let's say I go to London next week, and then I'm back on the ship doing one from Cartagena, Colombia. So I move around, as you know. I'm either flying or sailing. And but I do them on virtual or in reality, live. And I love doing it. I've done it 1,227 times, I think, or 8 times. And I love it because I've watched lives transform. I don't think there's anything more fulfilling in life than being able to do some service that you love to do that makes some sort of difference that people are grateful for, that change their life. So I'm blessed to do that every week. Just like you. You know exactly what I'm talking about because you're doing it every day.
Exactly. And this is why I wanted to get you back on to share this with more people, because again, I've done this 3 times myself. And I think I briefly shared this with you in our last conversation. My sister did not talk with our mother until I brought her to the Demartini experience, the breakthrough experience. And she did the method, and she realized how all of the things that we experienced growing up was exactly what we needed to get us to exactly where we are today. And that was profound. It was a liberation type moment. And that's why your work is so profound. I pray, and I want to elevate this as much as I can, because, by the time we leave this planet, I trust that this method will go into educational curriculums around the world. And I know you're working actively with this. So just quickly, we get the concept, we understand the balance point, the equilibrated state, not elated, not depressed, but right there, beautiful in the middle with gratitude for what is.
Chop wood, carry water.
Keep it simple. Chop wood, carry water. I love that. Where could one, that someone's got a challenge right now. Okay, they're elated or they're suppressed, depressed. Right now, they want to come into that beautiful homeostatic state, that present moment of gratitude. Is it something as simple as, and could we potentially start with, if we feel like someone's done us wrong, write down the benefits. And if we feel like someone's, really done some amazing things, write down the drawbacks. Is that a good place to start, or is that too simple?
Well, that's certainly not going to be unwise, because you're going to be able to see both sides of things. But another thing we can do that's ancient, in Romans 2, 1, chapter 2, verse 1, not that I'm a big Bible promoter or quote, but I'm just saying it because it was known back 2,000 years ago that when you point your finger at somebody, you got 3 pointing back. What you judge in others, beware, you do the same thing. It's an old proverb. And so not only asking what's the downside to what you think is up or the upside to what you think is down, but where do I display and demonstrate the same behavior?
Yeah.
Because when we judge somebody, it's only because they're reminding us of something we're either too humble or too proud to admit we have. But I've been doing this 41 years. And I've yet to see anything that somebody judges another individual that they haven't done in their own life. And that's why I think the old quote, the Christian quote, he who's without sin throw the first stone kind of thing still has merit, because we've had people that have gone and said, well, I would never do that. And I go, look again. You blinded yourself. Your pride is blocking you from seeing the inevitable. And what happens is we only judge other people and resent things in other people that we feel ashamed of in ourselves. And we only admire things in other people that we are proud of in ourselves. Once we see that, we realize that these people are in our life to teach us where our inauthenticities are and how to bring them back into balance. So I would also ask, in addition to when they've done something we're angry about, how did it benefit us? But also, where have we done the same thing and what's the benefit? Or if we're admiring somebody, where have we done the same thing and what's the downside? Because otherwise you're blinded by an infatuation or blinded by a resentment. And anybody who's been highly resentful knows that they have insomnia trying to sleep at night. And if they're highly infatuated, they can't sleep at night. And the insomnia is a feedback mechanism to let them know that they have an incomplete awareness and they're being inauthentic because they're too proud or too humble to admit what they see in others inside themselves. And so reflective awareness is what liberates, not deflective awareness. Deflection means that you see in them something you don't see in you. Reflective awareness is the highest awareness, where the world is a reflection of you. The seer, the seeing, and the seen are the same.
I love that quote. And I love how you say every person owns every trait. And when we see that within ourselves, we see it within others. When the seer and the seeing and the seeing is the same one.
40, almost 1 years ago, 40 to 41 years ago, I realized this reflection. And I realized that many times when I was speaking to others, I was speaking to myself. And I realized also that what I was judging in others was buried inside me. So I figured instead of waiting for people to bring it out of me and cause reactions and then have to go through and be humbled by it, I decided to go to the big, giant Oxford English Dictionary and to underline every possible human behavioral trait that I might react to. And I found 1,628 individual traits in this dictionary. And then I wrote out to the side, I underlined the trait in the dictionary, page by page, neurotic as I was. And then I asked, who is it that I know that displays that trait to the most extreme? And I wrote their name out to the side in small little print, pencil. And then I asked, where and when do I display and demonstrate that trait, the same trait, to the same degree as I see in this person? And sometimes I'd have to go and look at 10 examples and sometimes 20, 25 examples in myself until they were equal. But I was able to identify the most extreme people that I labeled as being that way. I found I had them all. There was not one trait that I went through the dictionary that I didn't have. And so I realized nothing's missing in me. I'm the hero and the villain. I'm the saint and the sinner. I'm the kind and the cruel, the virtue and the vice. I'm all the above. And if you took a drone and watched me for 3 months straight, 24 hours a day, you would see the hero and the villain. You'd see the kind and the cruel. You'd see all polarities inside me. And this is something that Nietzsche mentioned, and Castiglione and Machiavelli. They all referred to this. Most of us are indoctrinated by moral hypocrisies, stating that to be kind, don't be cruel. Your mother and grandmother say, be kind, don't be cruel, be nice, don't be mean, be generous, don't be stingy. And then they turn around and be moral hypocrites doing exactly the opposite. But most people are so indoctrinated by a monopoled state, which is designed to make people disempowered. It's a control tactic to manipulate people who are not in their executive function. They're caught in their amygdala. So the moral hypocrisies are probably the most disempowering things that society faces. And that's another story that we could maybe go down the rabbit hole on sometime. But I really believe that there's a transcendent awareness. And if you want to lead, you want to be a great leader, you have to be able to manage paradoxes within yourself and the world around you and embrace both sides of you and the world and people, because that's what you're going to get. And to expect anything but that would be futile.
Perhaps that's what we see coming out now, where we look up to, even certain cultures or traditions or religions and see one side without the other. And we're now starting to see a lot of things coming out. Media has changed. The news is changing. We're starting to see, hang on. Yeah, I looked up to these guys, and maybe it's not like that anyway. And I looked up to this movement, but hang on, they've got some darkness about them. And I looked up to like Hollywood, and I thought that was all good, but a whole bunch of stuff happening behind the scenes. Do you believe, John, that we're going to see a lot of stuff coming out in the near future that will demonstrate what the so-called hypotheses that I believe is a science that you're sharing with us right now?
There's an old proverb, the truth is in the hearts of the masters, not in the hands of the masses. The majority of people are run by their amygdala, and the amygdala wants to avoid pain and seek pleasure. And so I think that's inevitable. And so there has to be a social structure. If everybody was a CEO, the whole social structure would collapse. So you're going to have as the Buddha says, I'll have to teach them the illusions till they're ready for truth. So the masses, when I say the masses, I'm part of the masses at times when I'm not seeing both sides. And I'm part of the master when I do. And so whenever we're in a polarized and amygdala survival response, we're fooled. And anytime we're in the executive, more objective response, we're wise. And I think that that's inevitable. I don't know if the world's going to somehow become all enlightened. And I think that's delusion. I think we're going to have, as we've had for centuries, although we had illiterate people and now more people are literate, we're also feeding them misinformation of the amygdala. So even if they're becoming able to read, they still read things that aren't so. Paul Dirac, the Nobel Prize winner, said, it's not that we don't know so much, we know so much that isn't so. We're being bombarded by moral hypocrisies and fantasies, and we actually fall for the hero. Anytime you have a false attribution bias and give people credit or blame, you know you haven't got the whole picture. Anytime you put them on a pedestal or pit instead of putting them in your heart, you know you haven't got the whole picture. So, yeah, I'm not surprised when we find out that this person that everybody thinks is a hero, like a Lance Armstrong or whatever, there's the other side. And I didn't want to call it the shadow or the dark side, because the dark side has light in it, and the light side has dark in it. There's downsides to what you think is light, and these are just moral traps. So I like to think of it, it's all a blend. There's no polarity of black and white, really. It's just every trade has both sides. Let's say you're really generous and nice to somebody and give them money, and you think you're being nice, but now you're making them dependent and obligated and less resourceful and less of an entrepreneur and more dependent, And so that's the mean side that's in the nice side. And then you think, well, now you're a stingy person and they got to go out and work. My dad made me pay $7.50 a week to live when I was 9 years old at the house to pay for clothing, food, and rent. And people thought that's very cruel. That was a magnificent thing to do for me, to become an entrepreneur. And so I'm very grateful for that. But they thought that was mean. But I see right now that was a great gift for me. And many kids right now have been taken care of, and then they don't grow up. So the things you think are nice are mean, and the things you think are mean are nice. And so the whole thing is just an illusion. I'd rather just say, look for both sides simultaneously. Wilhelm Wundt, father of experimental psychology, tried to teach that. Find the simultaneity of contrast and become present and purposeful and patient and productive and prioritize and, empowered. That's, to me, much more wisdom. And we have it in the Taoist tradition. It was taught that way. In the Buddhist tradition, it was the middle path. In Christianity, it was called equanimity. In Mithraism, it was the path of the light. There's many names for this same state. But it's simply a process we can all, master. We can train ourselves and we can learn to. But I don't think that everybody all at once is going to be all that way. There's going to be a graded social structure from those that are disempowered to those that are empowered. Has been that way and will probably stay that way.
I know we've got to hop off because you've got a meeting. Just quickly, if that's the case, and I'm just going to be the devil's advocate. So if I go out and I meet Dr. John and I say, hey, John, and I say something mean to you, because I know that that's going to be support and challenge, because I know that that is, a way to serve you. And then at the same time, the soul wants to serve. So you want to be of service. You do incredible things for the world. I do beautiful things for the world because I want to serve. But when I serve, I'm also being mean. So why should I then go and be nice?
Well, I don't pursue niceness.
Or polite, or want to serve or help or help someone, get empowerment or healing or whatever.
Well, this is a very interesting thing. Sustainable fair exchange or reciprocity, sometimes called justice, sustains. If I do a service, I wrote in my book, How to Make One Hell of a Profit, Still Get to Heaven. It's a spoof. And in there I said, beware of gifts. They have a price. So I'm not gifting service. I'm doing something that I love, and I'm being compensated for it. So it's not a gift. It's an exchange. And if it's a fair exchange, it's sustainable, and both parties want to continue. But if I try to get something for nothing, eventually you're not interested. If I try to give something for nothing, eventually I'm not interested. So both the narcissistic or altruistic personas that we wear eventually become futile, and we eventually learn to humble our narcissism and to build up and say, hey, I deserve more than this altruism. And I finally find a sustainable, fair exchange, which means that I need to care about another human being to find out what their values are and to meet their needs, and vice versa. And sometimes, if I'm not aware of that, I'm going to be mean, but somebody else will be nice to them to support it. You've seen people attack people in the street and a bunch of supporters come. And sometimes I'm overly nice, and then other people give them hell. So I'm not, you can't disturb what I call the matrix. You can't disturb the matrix. You can participate in it, but you can't disturb it. And there's a higher order inside our apparent chaos that no matter what you do or don't do, you're still worthy of love because you're you're in your journey. So I don't get attached to having to be nice. Don't ever want to be mean, because what I think is nice is mean. And what I think is mean sometimes is nice. I've had people come up to me and said, I had a guy come up to me 2 days ago, at the breakthrough experience. And I really challenged his girlfriend. And she thought that her father was the one I was just telling you about, thought the father was cruel and all this stuff. And I challenged her, and he was protecting her and supporting, because Dr. Demartini is so assertive in these questions, holding you accountable. And then afterwards, he came up to me and he said, you transformed my girlfriend's life, and she's not angry with her dad. And I realize as long as she's been angry with him, we've been together. And now I'm having to be accountable. And I realize that this is teaching me I'm going to be both sides, and she's going to be both sides, and he's going to be both sides. And that's what life is. He says, I've had an eye-opening. I've been angry at people that weren't peaceful. And my anger is my internal warrior. And now I realize that both serve me. I'm going to have time for peace. It was in Ecclesiastes, the Old Testament thing that the Byrds made a song of in the 60s, 65, I think. There's a time for sowing, a time for reaping, a time for peace, a time for war, a time for all things under the sun. And you really aren't going to love yourself until you embrace all parts of yourself. So I don't get attached to the idea that I need to get rid of some part of myself. And some people say, well, isn't that being not accountable? No, it is being accountable. I brought my balance sheet into balance. What's not being accountable is striving for that which is unobtainable and trying to avoid that which is unavoidable. Yeah. That's not being accountable. That's actually being delusional.
This is good. Hey, John, I'm going to share this far and wide. The first thing, go to drdemartini.com, do the value determination process, do the exercise, get to know your value systems, and ask the question, how can I live more authentically in alignment with who and what I am? Step number 2, look up the breakthrough experience. Go and get that experience done for yourself. Bring your loved ones, bring your family. And I say that, and I'm not promoted to say that. I say that because it changed my life and it helped me find parts of me that I hadn't owned yet. And 3, John, just tell us, apart from those 2 important steps, where does one go to learn more about your work, please?
Just simply my website, drdemartini.com. Or maybe go to that movie, Breakthrough Movie Demartini. Yeah, the website will keep you busy.
Yeah, it's awesome.
Full of information. But
so much value there.
If somebody comes to the breakthrough experience, I ask people at the end of the breakthrough experience each week, how many of you learned something this weekend, that if you hadn't have been here, you could have gone your entire life through your life with certainty and never have learned? Every hand goes up every week.
Yeah.
So it's not, many people try to say, well, is it like this or is it like that? Nope. It's a unique body of work that I've been working on for 52 years.
Yeah, absolutely. drdemartini.com. John, it's an honor and it's a privilege. I know I have the honor of bringing you to Australia again soon and putting you up on the stage. I'm going to make sure I fill the audience for you, because this is the stuff that people need to learn and hear and receive during these times. I want to thank you for your time again. I know you've got a meeting, and so do I. So bless you, brother. It's always a privilege. Thank you so much for doing what you do, and thank you for your time today.
Thank you. The same way. Thank you for all the work you do and for inviting me to your podcast and also to your lovely programs. And please give hugs to all the loved ones around you, and look forward to seeing you again soon.
Absolutely. It's a privilege. Have a wonderful day. Dr. John Demartini, everybody.
Thank you.